We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Previously on Becoming Human.
It's like the senior prom. Oh, there they go! Smooch, smooch, smooch!
Okay, be that way. I really don't have time for this. I've got to get to work. Bye, Mirth. Mommy has to go to work. I'll see you later.
Mindy, it was wonderful seeing you last night. Let's not wait another 10 years. Love, Stevie.
Who's Stevie?
He's the lieutenant governor of Wyoming and your future stepfather.
There's another daytime exterior of the house with snow. Now Mirth is sitting next to Mork on the couch. The box of flowers is sitting on the arm of the couch. Mirth has Mork below his nose on a tissue. Then Mork takes Mirth's hand, which is kind of gross if you think about it, and says Mirth is such a comfort to him. He hopes that he gets to at least see Mirth on weekends and leap years. Mirth says, "Are you kidding? Mommy loves you, Daddy." So again, emphasizing that they love each other. Mork says, "I know that, but the problem is that Mommy loves someone else before she loved me." So it's not just the threat that Steve is in the present, but that he represents something from Mindy's past when she used to neck behind the library. Mirth admits that that's very possible, but Daddy should know that Mommy loves him more than anything else in the world. Mork is number one. He's the head honcho. And for some reason this made me think of network executives. Mork hopes that Mirth is right, but what if he's wrong? Mirth says, "Don't ask me. I haven't been able to cope with fractions yet." He gets the box and says he's going to take these flowers and be sure that they stay alive, which is nice. I mean, they could have just put them in the trash and Mindy would never know. Mirth guesses he'll put them in the tub with Pablo. He doesn't think Pablo will mind after carrying that dead thing around, so call back to the previous scene. He calls to Pablo and then barks fiercely. He exits back to the master bedroom. I like Mirth in this episode, especially in this scene, because he is being the supportive friend that Mork needs. Although, yeah, it's kind of difficult role for a very young child to play. I've talked about him quickly aging, and in the previous episode he seemed like an older preschooler or even a kindergartner. Here he's showing the maturity of, I would say, 7 to 9-year-old, although fractions come in later depending on the school, but like that's more of like a 10 or 11-year-old math concept. He is trying to help as much as he can, but Mork still has these doubts. He stands and picks up the red bow, then he drops it onto the couch again. He says to himself, "I wonder if she would have loved me then," meaning back in high school. He says he's got two choices. He can either stand here and talk to himself like a soap opera, so a bit of self-awareness and breaking the fourth wall, or he could go back in time and really find out. That's it. He'll do it. And we do know that Mork can travel back in time because that's what happened in his earliest episodes, including on Happy Days. He goes over to the armoire and opens it. As he says, he hasn't used these in a long time, but now is a very special occasion. He takes out a glittery silver shoebox and he sets it on the wicker chest. He opens it and takes out 2 ruby slippers. I mean, it's very obviously a Wizard of Oz reference on a series that has a lot of Wizard of Oz references. But his first joke is that they look like Liberace's lounge slippers, and I know that's not the first Liberace reference on the series. There's quick applause and laughter. In a high-pitched witch voice, he says, "I want these shoes!" like the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. He sits in the stage left armchair and takes off his brown slippers. He says he was an alien when he met her, and when he goes back, he'll be an alien again, which makes it sound like he's not an alien now. He thinks it should work the second time around. And we'll find out that what he means by alien is not space alien, but we'll get there. He now has the ruby slippers on, and he stands. In close-up, he taps them and says there's no place like home, so very overt Wizard of Oz reference. And then he says there's no place like severe pain in the ankles, so apparently he's tapping them too hard.
Go back in time. 71. Here I come. 71. Here I come.
We get a a transition alternating between his face and his feet. And instead of "There's No Place Like Home," he decides that he will chant 71, Here I Come. And then we get a spinning transition. The subtitles say that the band is playing disco music. And in some ways, this does feel more like 76 than 71, except for the Tom Hayden sign, which is a reference to one of the members of the Chicago 7. And I would say in general, in this scene, they're not trying too hard to look like 1971. It's just sort of vaguely not now. And by this point, both Laverne and Shirley and Happy Days were in the 60s instead of the 50s, but they were not consistent in how they portrayed the look of that time, and there were a lot of 80s anachronisms that slipped in. Mindy's pink prom dress looks relatively timeless. I mean, it didn't really scream 60s or 80s. It's just nice and princessy and pink. Steve didn't wear glasses then, but he does look like he should be on a Newlywed Game episode because he's got a black tux with a ruffled blue shirt. Glenda Faye is wearing red again, and yeah, it doesn't look particularly 60s, 70s, or 80s. Her date has, I don't know, a quasi-paisley jacket, but not exactly, and for some reason he holds a pipe. We'll find out he's a college student, but it still felt very affected for 1971. Dickie is in a purple Nehru jacket with a peace necklace. Again, if you don't watch this episode for any other reason, you need to see Paul Rubens in this outfit. It's, I think, presented as him looking dated for 71. That would have been an outfit more in fashion 3 or 4 years earlier. But I also feel like the wardrobe department just threw a bunch of costumes out and everybody saw what fitted them. Mork's suit is nice, but they gave him a red star button to indicate that he's Russian, and also some brown boots that look out of place at a prom. And he's brushing his hair in a different way. Dickie goes over and points at Mork, but he's not friendly like he is in the present. He says, red light, nobody gets in here without a student ID. That's the rules. I don't know if he has any position of authority or he just takes this role onto himself in the past and the present, but he is going to enforce this rule. Although Mindy later will not recognize Althea, Dickie knows everybody in the class and he knows that this is not somebody with a student ID. In a Russian accent, Mork says he's a foreign exchange student. I'm not sure why Mork didn't just claim to be a transfer student. It does give Robin Williams a more extended chance to show off his Russian accent. He says that he's happy to be in America. He introduces himself as Vladimir Ivanovich Orkov, and I assume the name Orkov is a little play on from Ork. He says, but you can call me Chuck. And I didn't know if that was a Chuck Cunningham reference or if the writers just think the name Chuck is funny. He chuckles. Dickie says, look, Chuck, I don't care if you're Dr. Zhivago. Very famous movie of the 60s. Nobody gets in here without a student ID. He tells Chuck to beat it before Dickie is forced to get physical with him. So he is playing off of the nerdy, wimpy image that he has, that he's threatening violence, but we know that he probably can't follow through.
What seems to be the problem here? This foreign guy's trying to crash. I'm trying to keep this gym safe for democracy. Well, I think there's a more reasonable way to deal with this.
Oh, thanks, Pops. Mr. McConnell.
Do I know you from someplace?
I come by the music store all the time, looking for a copy of Brezhnev Sings Ray Charles, you know. Georgia.
Look, Dickie, he's an exchange student. I think we can let him in.
Thank you very much. If you ever come to the Soviet Union, I can get you such beautiful women, you know, Soviet girls.
Hey, I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. Especially since you're the only guy here without a date except for me.
Whoa. Who is she? She is one foxy mammal. Boy, I would walk 10 miles in the snow just to stand in her garbage.
That's Mindy McConnell. You might as well forget it. I've been after her since the 2nd grade. You'd think by now I'd at least have gotten a pity date. She's only got eyes for that nerd.
Steve! I don't care what you say. I am going to marry her.
Dream on.
Boy, she's got a Jiffy Pop hairdo, too.
I was so happy that they were able to find a way to work Fred into this scene, playing the chaperone, and I wish that they'd given him more to do, but it's still nice that we got what we got. And we can see that they gave him more hair than in the present, but not as much as in the flashback to when he was a young widower. Dickie says that he's trying to keep the gym safe for democracy because, of course, you can't let a Ruski in. Fred is being reasonable, which he usually is, and Mork is very happy to see him. This made me think a little bit of Peggy Sue Got Married, where she goes back 25 years. She's just so happy to see people, but some of those people are dead in the present, so it's not like it's been that long since Mork saw Fred. But maybe he wasn't counting on Fred showing up to the prom, so that adds to his happiness. There's a reference to the music store, so I thought that was nice continuity. And Mork says that he's been looking for the album Brezhnev Sings Ray Charles, and I think there's a pun here on Georgia, as in Soviet Georgia. And yes, there was another reference to Brezhnev recently. Leonid Brezhnev was the Russian leader from 1960 to 64, and then again in 77 to 82. This aired about a year before his death. And yes, they would have known who Brezhnev was back in 71. Of course, we get a stereotype about unattractive Russian women, not for the first time. Dickie observes that he and Chuck are the only ones there without dates. Mork calls Mindy a foxy mammal, which I guess is a spin on Foxy Mama. Doesn't really seem like something a white guy, especially a Russian, would have said in 71, but he gets away with it. Mindy, by the way, has her hair up with lots of curls, and that kind of adds to her princess image here. Mork does he'd walk 10 miles in the snow to stand in her garbage line, which has come up before, including, I think, on the second crossover episode with Happy Days, where he's telling Richie about living with Mindy. We find out that Dickie has been after Mindy since the second grade, so when we first meet him, it's been over 20 years. And it's supposed to be ironic that Dickie calls Steve a nerd. Mork says that he's going to marry Mindy, and of course he does, but Dickie thinks he's crazy. When Mork says that Mindy has a Jiffy Pop hairdo, I think that's because of all the curls, but it felt also like it was a Robin Williams catchphrase that I couldn't place. I should mention that the band has French costumes with striped shirts and berets because there is a French theme at the prom, and we also see that the orange punch is on a table with a red, white, and blue tablecloth and red, white, and blue bouquets, but French rather than American. Then we go to Mindy, Steve, Glenda, and Glenda's date. Steve says he may not be a poli-sci major, but he still thinks that history will prove that Nixon is a great president. So, of course, that's a joke that he would not be able to make in 76, with the irony that there would be with him making the observation in 71. Glenda thinks Carl, meaning her date, knows what he's talking about, and so Carl is the poli-sci major. We see here that Glenda is dating a college man. Glenda says that Carl writes for his college paper. Mindy is intrigued by this. She says, really? Do they have a good journalism department at Columbia? So we find out that Carl, who has no lines, and I don't know who the actor is who plays him, is studying journalism at Columbia. Steve says, come on, Snooks. How are you going to be a reporter? In a newspaper, you can't dot your I's with little hearts. She says, give me a break, Steve. So we find out that he has an annoying nickname for her, Snooks, which, makes little pooter sound good. And he is scoffing at her. I wouldn't say it's an ambition yet because she's just only starting to vocalize it, but she is intrigued. She's meeting somebody who's a journalism major, and that's making her think about, well, what would it be like to be a journalism major? And she wants to find out more, and he's just dismissive of it. And so that puts an interesting spin on her telling him that she became a journalism major and works at a TV station and kind of minimizing it, not being proud, because maybe on some level she remembers this conversation they had at the senior prom where he dismissed her ambitions, although it's been 10 years, allegedly. Mork has come over and he says, good evening, how are you? Permit me to introduce myself. I am foreign exchange student Vladimir Ivanovich Orlov, but you can call me Lumpy. And I wasn't sure if that was a Leave It to Beaver reference. He says to Steve, excuse me, but would beefy all-American type mind if I trip the light fanatic with his princess all-American beauty? Steve is not beefy, he's just tall. And there is this princess motif going on that Mindy looks like a princess at her prom. Chuck, the foreigner, sees her that way. Glinda looks delighted. Even in the past, she is on some level shipping Mork and Mindy. Steve says, "Are you kidding? This is a gag, right? You're in the drama department?" Mork says, "No, it's no gag. For one dance, he will give an autographed picture of Joseph Stalin." Mindy says he doesn't have to do that, but she does seem impressed that he knew Stalin, and he says personally. Even though Joseph Stalin died in 1953, and so the only way that Ivan would have known him is as a baby, but maybe Mindy doesn't immediately realize this. Steve grabs Mindy's hand and leads her away. He tells Ivan, "Some other time, okay, pal?" Mindy says sorry to Ivan. Mork says later on the rebound. So that's kind of like the usual, hey, see you later on the rebound, basketball slang kind of thing, but there's also the undertone that Mork on some level feels like he is the rebound, that she didn't end up with Steve and settled for him. Glinda says, "So tell me, Vladimir, what part of France are you from?" He looks confused. During season 3, they did not have any real dumb blonde jokes. That kind of is one that they're at a French-themed prom, and yet she thinks somebody who's very obviously Russian is French. Both Mindy and Steve look annoyed. She wishes he'd mellow out. I guess they mellow out is meant to make us feel like it's 71, and she calls him Steven. Earlier, when she called him Stevie, that was a sign that they were renewing their friendship, and now in the past, when she calls him Steven, it's more formal and distant. She tells Steve that the poor guy is from a foreign country, and she doesn't know why he's being so uptight tonight anyway. And so uptight is supposed to make us think, oh, it's practically the 60s. Steve says he just thought that Vladimir was kind of immature for a senior, and so that's meant to be ironic. In this scene and the other scene, there are people that do not look like they're 18 or 28. I mean, there were men with bald spots. Just throw all the extras into these costumes. Don't think about it too much. And I'll mention right now that Robin Strand plays Steve Sanders, and he was then 29. He worked from Is Enough in 78 to Jake and the Fat Man in 91, although he seems to still be alive as of this recording. And I think I most would have known him from either this or his one episode of Square Pegs the following year. But yes, at least he's close to being 28. Dickie runs over and tells Steve that some of the guys are drinking beer in the bathroom. If Steve comes with Dickie, they'd let Dickie watch. He's figured out that the way to get to watch other guys drink beer is to have a cool guy go with him. And of course, the thing that's in it for Steve is that he gets to drink beer himself. And Steve is tempted by this. He tells Snooks that he'll be right back. She says, "Great, so you're going to leave me here and go get loaded on our prom night?" He says, "Hey, if it wasn't in the boys' room, I'd take you with me." So he's missing the point, that she doesn't want him to get drunk that night, and he thinks that she just feels left out, that she can't get drunk. So even though they've dated each other for 2 years, they don't really seem to know each other as people that well. Because Mork has returned to this time, there's the effect of how much is he altering it. I mean, I think the discussion about Nixon happened, but maybe some of the other stuff didn't, or not in the way that it does by Mork being there. Steve and Dickie dash out. We can see Fred looking concerned in the background, but he doesn't intervene. I thought it would have been nice if there had been a moment where Fred came over and at least patted Mindy's arm. He didn't necessarily have to say, "Hey, that Steve isn't good enough for you." Maybe in a longer version of this, he would have. I think that it's designed so that Mindy doesn't really have anybody to confide in. Glenda doesn't seem like somebody that she's going to talk to about any of this. Mindy tentatively smiles at Mork, who comes over. He says, "Do svidanya." Excuse my accent as always. She says hi, and he says yo. She asks if he likes being a foreign exchange student. He says it's not bad. He came to Boulder to study Russian literature. Boy, that's kind of redundant, huh? I wasn't sure why he said redundant. They chuckle. We can now see that Fred is grinning in the background, so he's observing enough to see that his daughter has found a nicer boy to talk to at the prom. Mindy says that her art teacher went to Russia once, and the teacher said it was like really different than from here. I thought it was interesting throwing the like to make Mindy sound younger. Mork says it's all right, and he says, "Let me enunciate to you. You know, in 1964 you had the Beatles invasion. Of course, that's the British invasion with all the bands, most notably the Beatles, coming over. He says, well, in 1968 we had the Czechoslovakian invasion. You got music, but we got land. It wasn't like Czechoslovakia invaded Russia, it was the other way around." They laugh together. He hesitantly invites her to boogie, shake her booties. She realizes he's inviting her to dance. Boogie was a term in 71, but shake, shake, shake your booty was later. She says she can't because she's going steady. He says he thought this was the land of the free and the home of the foot-long hot dog. She says, well, it is. And she agrees to dance with him.
Whoa. Oh, I must do like you do. Hey, look, I'm drowning. Boy, I love this country of yours, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we are pretty lucky here. I was thinking about maybe being a journalist. I'd really like to tell people what's going on in this country.
Right off.
But I don't know. It's kind of a hard field for a woman to break into. And I don't know if I'd be any good at it anyway.
Oh, you must go for it, you know?
Really?
I think that someday your family will be so proud of you.
Thanks, that's really nice. How do you say thank you in your country?
Oh, well, like this.
Oh, that's nice. You know what else I was thinking about doing?
Had enough with your borscht, Bree.
Wait. I have my green card. Wait, please. Would not like to do Esther Williams impression.
This is the moment we've all been waiting for. It gives me great pleasure right now to announce the names of this year's prom king and queen. I hope this isn't another failing notice. Okay, act your age, not your IQ. Okay, and the winner is Katharine Hepburn. I was just kidding. Oh, big surprise. Steve Sanders and Mindy Mikado.
This definitely isn't a slow dance or a close dance, or really even much of a touch dance. He does Russian steps, but he also throws in things like the swim. And while they're dancing, she confides in him about her dream of being a journalist. So maybe this has been something she's been thinking about for a while, but just never really verbalized till that night. They have this rapport, even though they've only known each other for a few minutes. She feels comfortable enough to confide in him, and he encourages her, which is definitely a contrast to Steve. When he says that someday her family will be proud of her, there's a double meaning, because he doesn't just mean her father and grandmother, but her future husband and son will be proud that she became a journalist. He gives her cheek kisses as thank yous. So Steve sees that and he gets very jealous. I noticed he wasn't gone very long. I mean, maybe he just drank one beer and came right back. I don't know. And there's a reference to Mork having a green card, which he does. There's probably the third or fourth Esther Williams reference. When Dickie says, act your age, not your IQ, that feels like a Pee-wee catchphrase. And even if it's not, it's that kind of phrasing that he had. The joke about Katharine Hepburn, that's like reading the envelope at the Oscars. And that was a name that they figured people would know in 71 and 81. He sounds very Pee-wee on his delivery of their names. Glenda is very happy for Mindy, and she calls it dreamy and says she knew it would happen. Mork looks sad, and Mindy looks uncomfortable. Glenda, of course, is oblivious to this. Dickie sings Pop and Circumstance before he leaves the stage. Fred takes out a camera, and it's probably not a vintage 71 camera, so he can take pictures. Dickie crowns Steve and hands him a scepter, although I noticed later that Dickie was holding the scepter. Glenda puts the tiara on Mindy's head. Dickie says to make way for the king and queen to dance. There's a cut to Mork still looking sad. As Mindy and Steve dance, she says, well, I hope you're happy. Steve is smiling at the crowd, and he says, yeah, we won, didn't we? She says, is that all you care about? He says they're taking pictures for the yearbook, so she should smile. I don't know who in the crowd is taking pictures. I don't think it was Fred's pictures. I think those are for the family. But it makes sense that there would be pictures of the prom king and queen for the yearbook. He says it's the biggest night of Mindy's life. She pulls away and says, yeah, it just might be, because this is their last date. He's surprised, and she says, I used to think you're a really nice guy, but I've changed my mind. She's seen that he's mean to strangers, he's inconsiderate of her, he's self-centered, he's unaware of her feelings, and so on. And so this is the last straw. She's done. Now, in the reality where Mork didn't travel back in time, they must have broken up for other reasons, because when they meet again, it doesn't seem that bitter. But maybe he went off to Wyoming to study poli-sci, who knows. And yeah, I guess it's implied that he's a Republican because he admired Nixon. She goes over to Mork and calls him Lumpy, and she asks him to dance with her. This is another thing that's going on, that the Mindy that we meet in 1978 is a feminist. Although she has some doubts, she's pretty self-confident. She comes to realize that she wants to go back to college, and pursue a journalism degree. And the Mindy we see in this flashback or time travel or whatever it is not as confident, and part of that is because she has a boyfriend who's undercutting her. But she asks a guy to dance. And so that, I think, along with her decision to look into journalism, shows the growth that she has in this evening. Some of it due to Mork and some of it due to herself. Mork looks quietly delighted, and he says, you're asking me, a humble peasant? So it's partly like, oh, he's Russian, and so he's a humble peasant, but I think that, again, fitting into the fairy tale motif that the princess has chosen him. She glares over at Steve, and so this could be kind of like a gesture, but I think she does actually want to spend more time with Lumpy, and she starts dancing with him. Other couples dance in the foreground, including Glenda and Carl. When we see Mindy again, Mork is gone, and when I was watching this the second time through, I noticed also that she wasn't wearing the tiara anymore. She looks around in confusion and disappointment. When we go back to Mork in the living room, he's standing and he's still in his red and white sleepwear, and I notice his hands are empty. He shakes himself and says, whew, like this has been quite an experience traveling back in time. He looks at his wristwatch, and I just mentioned that because he used to wear an ankle watch, but of course, I think maybe in putting the orc back into Mork, he switched over to a wristwatch. He says 10 years and 2 minutes flat. The in-flight movie wasn't that bad either. So I guess the process of coming back from 71 into the present takes 2 minutes. And it's like a plane trip where they had an in-flight movie. And he says they finally found a place to show Heaven's Gate. And that made me laugh out loud because even though I've never seen Heaven's Gate, it was, and for many years after, was an infamous flop that came out in 1980. Ironically, it looks like it was set in Wyoming. The critics were very harsh, and it earned only $3.5 million against its $44 million budget. And its runtime, at least in one version, is 219 minutes, so maybe he just saw the best 2 minutes of it. Mindy opens the door in the same outfit from before. They say hi to each other, and he rushes over. She says she came back because she feels they haven't really cleared the air about Steve. She probably hasn't been gone that long, but this was kind of nagging at her. She did feel like they needed to resolve this. He takes both her hands and says, "Aw, come on, that's all in the past. Jealousy's just insecurity, and you've never ever given me anything to feel insecure about." So that was very sweet, that he recognizes that she's not somebody who is trying to hurt his feelings. It shows that he's had some growth in this episode.
I love you.
Oh. You know, sometimes I think I've waited my whole life for you. Thanks for showing up.
Oh, thanks for waiting. Yeah, I better go check on Murph. Today we're going to teach Pablo how to avoid hairballs. Oh, I picked you up a little something.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. A little surprise.
Mm-hmm.
We get another I love you, and we hear that she waited her whole life for him. I mean, she was only 21 when they met. Or in this version of reality, she was 25. They kiss lightly. There's another reference to Pablo, who has hairballs. I wondered where Mork got the paper bag for the tiara. I guess he took it off her head when they were dancing, and somehow she didn't notice it. But I guess if they could have an in-flight movie, maybe this is like the barf bag? I don't know. She's very surprised by it, of course, and then he does a bit of the Twilight Zone theme, and then that gets incorporated into the music. Some creative music touches and way things were shot in this episode that I thought were nicely done. There's no tag this time, and there's no Orson, and of course we didn't have Orson in the previous episode because Mork talked to Orson's housekeeper instead. When I think of season 4, I always think of this episode as one that could have been done before Mirth came along, although of course we do see Mirth comforting his father and reacting to his parents arguing and so on. For the most part, it is about Mork and Mindy's relationship and the passage of time, looking at things in a fresh way for both of them. I rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 egg scale, which measures how well it delivers what I'm looking for in the series. And this one, I'm going to go with a 3. It's pretty good. It's pretty solid. I do feel that there are ways it could have been better. Fred had been given more to do. If maybe they could have had more of the many classmates that Mindy knew in the first season show up or at least be referred to, that would have been nice. And yeah, the whole timeline thing does bug me, especially because it never felt like 1971, and I don't think of Mindy as 28. I think of her as 24, maybe 25 at this point. Like I said, there's some nice touches here. There are things that made me laugh out loud, and it does have that delightful and iconic, I'm going to say, performance by Paul Reubens. Dickie is a bit of a dick, and he is not a likable character, but I loved watching him, and I just wanted more. I like how he plays off of the rest of the cast. It was just fun. I was amused that he had so much backstory. More than we got for poor Glenda Faye. And yeah, I'm okay with them bringing Glenda Faye. I think that added a little bit of something, and they did, I guess, have to have the best girlfriend character reacting and saying, oh, there's your ex-boyfriend, and kind of egging her on and being excited about this, and the contrast between her and Mindy as well. The other characters are okay. The messenger and Althea were not really necessary, but they kind of rounded things out. Robin Strand is fine with a very unlikable character that's not fun to watch in the way that Dickie is. It would have been nice if we had any indication what it was that drew Mindy to him. He's good looking, but I can't imagine her putting up with him for 2 years. But it was a small class and maybe there just wasn't much selection. I also rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 heart scale, which measures how well it supports and promotes the romantic relationship of Mork and Mindy. And like I said, this episode pretty much is about their relationship and how going to the reunion and meeting her ex impacts that. Then we also see how compatible would they have been if they'd met when they were around 18. But it also didn't feel like a super shippy episode. There is some kissing, there's definitely I love yous, and we're saying that his parents love each other. But it also felt like this is another episode about Mork's insecurities in a different way than My Dad Can't Beat Up Anybody, the previous episode, where Mork has to be reassured a lot. But it is more shippy than anything we've seen since Mirth was born. So I'm going with a 2.5. Above average. Could have been more, but it was nice to see a return to that. Oh, and it was also not on a shippy note, but I was glad to see Cora back. Again, would have liked to have seen more of her, but anything was nice because it was her first one since the beginning of the honeymoon episode. Overall, definitely a flawed episode, but one that was a nice change of pace from what we got recently in a season that doesn't give us as much focus on Mork and Mindy's relationship as I hoped. That was good. I tend to like episodes with flashbacks and reunions and so on, so I did like that, even though, again, it felt off to me. 3 eggs, 2.5 hearts. This is Paula Schaffner with episode 76, Long Before We Met. Today is the first day of the rest of your life.
He is a very bright, very gifted man. So would you welcome Mr. Pee Wee Herman?
I was hoping maybe you could stay up here for just a minute, Miss Fairchild, because I wanted to... I just wanted to spend a minute with you on stage here because I was afraid, like, my friends wouldn't believe that I really knew you or anything. So I was wondering maybe if you just, sign an autograph. Would you mind?
Sure.
Okay, here's my autograph book. See a Pee Wee size pencil. Get it? Okay, if you just write to Pee Wee from Miss Morgan Fairchild.
You want the miss on there, huh?
Please.
Okay.
Great. I'm a big fan of yours.
Really?
Yeah.
You're not the ones who were sending those 40-page MASH notes, are you?